Good afternoon to everybody. I want to thank, first of all, the Mishpacha, the Dizenbrook Mishpacha, who have dedicated this Dvar Torah, Ilu Nishmat Nina, Zecher Tzadeket Livracha, full name Nina Hessa Bat Natan Aaron, that a very special woman who was part of our Kehillah. I would say like Yischar Chashuva, had a tremendous dignity. She was like a queen. I remember always that after, whenever I gave a shiurim, she always would come afterwards and make certain harot, certain comments, certain speak about certain questions. And may Bezrat Hashem, may she have an aliyah b'gan Eden, that her wonderful neshama should have as I say, an aliyah, an ascent in Gan Eden. This week I want to speak about one of the most amazing figures, Rabbanim, that you can see, Rabbi Yischar Shlomo Teichtal. You can see that he passed away in the Shoah, mamash towards the end of the Shoah, and his Yotzat is on the 10th of Shvat, so it's basically this past week leading up to Parshat Beshalach. So as you can see that he was born in 1885. He was born part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And what he was really a great Talmid Chacham. Already at a young age, he had gotten Semeicha by the age of 19, sort of 21, already from a couple of Rabbanim. And he was a person who, in the 1930 already, what he did was he had founded a yeshiva, and he was aligned with the Aguda, and to the right of that, in other words, he was living over here in Austria-Hungary. And what he did was he was one of his mentors with the Minchat Elazar, who was headed, so to speak, the Munkach Rebbe, who was vehemently anti-Zionist. He always used to make a joke that in Munkach they used to say that the Churban, that the destruction of the Second Temple, came because of Kamtzam Bar Kamtza. And they used to make a joke that in Munkach, the Kuf in the Kamtza stands for Kommunisten, the Mem in that word stands for the Mizrachistin, the Mizrahi, the Tzadik stands for Zionistin, and even the Aleph stands for Agadistin. So basically, the philosophy one is remaining in the Galut, and because we're only going to get out of the Galut through Hashem's being passive and Hashem bringing about miracles. And number two, the second reason for being in the Galut was at that time, I mean, we're speaking between 1885 until the passing away of Rabbi Teichtal was in 1945. We'll speak about exactly the details. So the Minchat Elazar, who lived during that time, and before he passed away, before the Holocaust, that's when the Tzionut was in full throttle, more or less, and he said that to go and to be part of the Zionism, and part of the Zionists who were Chilonim, they were secular, they were anti-Torah, etc. So there's absolutely no room to participate in any of their endeavors. So that's what is the milieu in which the age in which Rabbi Teichtal was born, and he was part of that world. He believed in that world. He said that. But then what happened was that the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia, where he was living at the time. He fled to Hungary, and when he saw the terrible things that happened in the Shoah, he made a 180-degree turn. And this is what is so remarkable about this person. Here was a person who was known to be one of the great rabbis in Hungary, Europe at the time. And his whole life, he had sort of been part of the Aguda, and as I said, to the right of it. And now when he sees what's happening in the Shoah, he escapes, and he becomes then an avid advocate of going on Aliyah to Eretz Israel and about speaking about the greatness of Eretz Israel. And what he does was that he writes in his books, which is more like a sort of a diary, book, which he wrote while he was in hiding in between Czechoslovakia and Hungary. He went sort of the whole time, went from one place to the second place. He hit here, he hit there. So he writes over there that he made a terrible mistake and he regrets it. And that all these, I can imagine how far this goes. He says all the tzarot of the Holocaust. Now he could say it. I mean, we couldn't say it. We can't say it. But that's how he who's going through it, he's saying that it all happened because we rejected going to Eretz Israel, and he says that we made a mistake, and if we and the other leadership of the Aguda and others would have urged Jewish people to go to Eretz Israel, this thing wouldn't have happened. Certainly not in the manner in which it happened. One must say in parenthesis that Rav Teichtal, Hashem Yikam Damo, he when he wrote all these things, he didn't know the full dimension of the tragedy. I mean, he passed away basically just before the war ended, basically like January of 45, and he didn't know to what extent there was such a terrible, like in inverted commas, the final solution. But this is what he writes. And so just first of all, let's just go back to he is trying to escape the Nazis, going from one place to another place. And what he does is he reaches Hungary. And what he does is he's like sort of in an attic, and he writes all sort of like a diary / book. It's called Habanim Semeicha. He has a picture of it, right, in which he, it's all off by heart. He hasn't got any books. It's just amazing how he's phenomenal memory that he writes the entire book basically off by heart. I know the sources, sometimes it's not exact, but he didn't have a chance to revise it. But what is amazing, so the boy, just go into the book for a second. How did he die? He fled from when he was in Hungary, when the Nazis invaded in 1944. So then what he did was he fled, and he fled sort of towards Germany and get to Czechoslovakia. But then when the Germans realized that everything was in end, so then the barbarians, what they did was the Nazis, they sort of expedited and speeded up it as much as possible to search for Jews and to kill them. So he was found, so to speak, in Czechoslovakia, and he was put on a train to Auschwitz. And as the Allies were coming and the Russians coming closer to Auschwitz, so the Germans moved all the inmates closer to Germany. And on the train that he was in 1945, he was in this train, and his one of his family in the Hakdama to Habanim Semeicha, he records exactly the circumstances of his father's death. He says that the Nazis, in their cruelty, they would throw to the absolutely starved inmates little morsels of food, and they would get they would get a sinister, perverted hana'ah, pleasure of seeing the people groveling for some food. And anyway, they threw out a morsel of bread that it was supposed to be one of the Jews. And the Ukrainian, what he did was that over there in the train, what he did was he saw it, and he snatched it from the Jew. So Rav Teichtal was a person unbelievable. His courage. He said, "Give it back to him. It's not yours." And in the end, because of that, the Ukrainian, with the help of the Nazis, they killed him. He was standing up for a Jew. That's how he died. So now let's just go back. As we said, in the middle of the Holocaust, Rabbi Teichtal, who was like associated with Munkach, a little bit with Satmar, etc., he did an about turn, and he said that all this came about because we didn't go on Aliyah, and then what Hashem did was that He sends pressure to the Jewish people. What is He doing it from? When there's all these tzarot that came, they came because Hashem wants to give us a hint that we should go now, get out of the Galut and come to Eretz Yisrael. That's what He's sending us the tzarot for. That's exactly what not only him, but before him, also the Khatam Sofer says. And that was the problem, by the way, in parentheses, that was the problem that happened in Egypt. In Egypt, there was, this is what the Sforno says, the Sforno who lived in the 15th century, sorry, the 4th, 15th, 14th century. So what he said was that the Egyptians, what they did was in the beginning, what they wanted to enslave the Jewish people, but they thought that the Jewish people would take a hint and get out of the country. Instead of taking a hint, what they did said, they wanted to show that they're good citizens. So what they did was they volunteered for that work. So that's when the enslavement increased. So that's the problem. The problem is Hashem gives us hints that we should, because of the tzarot, to go and participate in the Gula and go back to Eretz Yisrael. And instead, the Jews, what they do is, they put up all sorts of offices about anti-Semitism and put up monitoring anti-Semitism and all sorts of museums. But Hashem wants you to get up and go. So this is what he wrote. And it's amazing that when he writes in it, can you imagine the strength and the courage to say, I erred? Here was one of it's not only a matter of to say that I erred, which is incredible courage in and of itself. But what he did was he writes a book about showing that everything that he said and the other rabbis it says was incorrect. And speaking about the greatness of Eretz Yisrael and how we should love Eretz Yisrael and return to Eretz Yisrael, etc. And then, but not only that, what he does is he pushed that this should be published in the middle of the Holocaust. He wanted it, and in fact, some of that work, these sum of copies, was published in Budapest in Hanukkah of 1944. Can you imagine? This is what who's his audience? His whole audience is all the Haredim and others, that we should have gone to Eretz Yisrael. And we made a mistake, and he's pushing that just should be published in the middle of the war, and it was in 1944. So that's the amazing thing about this person. There's two things which I wanted to add on. There's like today, like you know how it is when it comes to history, that some people say that he wasn't as Rav Kook as people say. Other people say he was as Rav Kook as I say. One thing, was he a Zionist? Wasn't he a Zionist? So, like I think there was a Professor Reiser, who said, you know what? He says he's not getting now into like arguments with people. Was he a Zionist? Wasn't he a Zionist? He was. The one thing for sure, because Zionism, you see, has got so many different definitions within secular Zionism, within religious Zionism. So it's like just each one sort of defines it as it is, and then goes and asks the question: was he a Zionist or not a Zionist, according to their definition of Zionism? But one thing that Professor Reiser, who's a contemporary, he says a very interesting point, that Badai, when you look at the Yahweh's a Haredi person, remained Haredi until his death, in Haredi on the outside, and he, if you compare certain statements that he made with those of Rav Kook, they're very, very much the same. And that's what has to be pointed out, because there's two types of Zionism. There's Zionism, I'm speaking about even religious Zionism. There's a religious Zionism, which is about that there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, mitzvah to go back to Eretz Yisrael. And we fulfill one of those mitzvot. And that is sort of agreed many times, whether it's the person's an aguda, not an aguda. The whole chidush of Rav Kook was that the Zionism of his day is connected also to Geula and redemption. If you take, for example, the Rebbe Migur, who urged all his followers to leave Poland and to come to Israel so that they can be mashpia, that they can sort of influence whatever is going to happen in Israel, but they didn't speak in terms of Geula, he didn't speak in terms of redemption. He spoke about there's a mitzvah, so yeah, we do the mitzvah. But the uniqueness of Rav Kook was, and the sort of the part which was like the more difficult thing, is that he attributed all those historical events, he gave it a religious category, and he spoke about Geula. And on that, the Habanim Semeicha was exactly on the same page as Rav Kook. So let's conclude with two things. A very famous thing that he brings in his book is that a person, he started to cry when he said that there was this one shtetl, and in the shtetl there was a shamus, and the shamus died, and the widow was left with nothing. And now the question is that how they didn't have enough like pension to give the widow, so they thought like this: the widow will consider to do certain functions in the shul as if she is the shamas, and one or two other things which it's not right that a woman should do. Then the kehillah, each one will volunteer to do certain parts of what the shamas, her late husband, did. So they decided now that so one of the people, the question came now when it came to Elul, who's going to wake up the people for slichot? So there was this one person who was, let's call him the poya of the village, of the shtetl, and when he decided, so that, hold on, so what it did was that the woman, the widow, she that was one of her things, to go and to knock at the door and to at like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning to wake the people up for slichot. So the first house that she happened to knock on the door was a person who was like a shaygatz, and he didn't keep anything, and he ate tripe, etc. And he was like a very he couldn't wonder who's knocking at his door at 4 o'clock. He sees there's a woman. He asks her, "What you doing?" She says, "You know what? My husband used to do this. I'm a widow, and he used to be the shamas, and now so I'm doing it." So he was so like upset that this is what she's reduced to. Says, "You go back home, and I'll do it." So he went now to all the people, and he started to knock on their door. The next house that he knocked on, the next little, so someone opens the door. They look at who's this person, the shaygas. So what do you want? Says, I'm waking up. You up because it's now slichat. He says, you the guy who eats pork. You're going to wake me up to do slichot. So he shuts the door on him and he says, like, get out of here. And goes back to sleep. And so it happened to the second one. Again, he knocks on someone's door, and what he does is the person opens up. What you're doing, he sees that, yeah, it's the shaygas, you, Machalo Shabbos, you waking me up for slichot. And again, what he does is he shuts the door on him. In the end, no one came to slichot, and they all came late for davening. The Rav said, well, what happened over here? So they said, you know what, someone woke us up, the shaygas from the village, and we thought, what, he's going to wake us up for slichot. So he said, you people are like crazy. If we would have, Dachon, everything that you say about him is correct. He's a shaygatz, he's a gambler. What he does is he doesn't keep Shabbos, he's a person who eats tripe, etc. But what did he ask you to do? Did he ask you now to come and to gamble? Did he ask you now to eat tripe? He asked you to come to do shlichot, to slichot. So because he now does such a thing, so why shouldn't you come to slichot? Right? So that's what he said. The Rav Teichtal says this is exactly the thing. Nachon, the Zionists are exactly like you say. We're not defending them. They're Mechalo Shabbos, they're disgusting. But wait a minute. They're telling you to come and do something which is the Torah wants you to do, to come now to Israel. So what are you now saying that you're not now you're not participating because they happen to be the ones who have left the Torah? In the Parsha of Beshalach, he says that he brings a midrash. It's not his. The midrash says that Hashem told the people, said, "Don't cry, don't shout out for me when they feel trapped, but stop shouting and go towards Yam Suf." So the midrash says that in the schut of you traveling towards Yam Suf, right? In the schut of your traveling, in the schut of Yerushalayim, what you'll do is I'll do the miracle of Kriyat Yamsuf. Rav Teichtal asked, but what's the connection? What is the Midrash are saying? In the schut of Yerushalayim, Hashem is doing the splitting of the sea. So that's what he's saying. He was saying he brought a whole lot of proofs as part, and this was one of his proofs, that when the Jewish people in a state of tzara, be it on the communal level or it be on the individual level, when the people now, what they do is in the schut of their cleaving to and attachment and being into Eretz Yisrael, that helps the people to overcome the tzarot. And that's what the pshat is, B'schut Yerushalayim, in the schut of Eretz Yisrael Yerushalayim, that you are now going to continue. You're stopping to davening. You carry on now the journey. In that schut of Eretz Yisrael, I'm going to redeem you. Shabbat Shalom Lekulah.